The town of Black Ridge was the kind of place that time forgot. Tucked deep in the wilderness of the Rocky Mountains, it was a patchwork of weathered wooden buildings, dirt roads, and a population that barely scraped 300 souls. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and the mountains loomed overhead like silent sentinels. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as much a part of the landscape as the towering evergreens. But lately something had shifted. The air felt heavier, the shadows longer. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the edge of the forest where the Black Ridge mine had recently opened. The mine, owned by the shadowy corporation Erebus Industries, was supposed to bring jobs and prosperity to the struggling town. Instead, it brought unease. It began with Tom Hargrove. Tom was a logger, a burly man with calloused hands and a laugh that could shake the rafters of the Rusty Spoon, the town's only diner. He was a fixture in Black Ridge, a man who knew the forest like the back of his hand. But 3 days ago, he hadn't come home. His wife, Martha, had waited all night, the dinner she'd made growing cold on the table. By morning, she was at the sheriff's office, her face pale and her hands trembling. He wouldn't just leave, she insisted, her voice breaking. Something's happened to him. Sheriff Grady, a grizzled man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, had nodded solemnly. He'd known Tom for years, and the idea of him vanishing without a trace didn't sit right. But Grady was a practical man, and he'd seen enough of life to know that sometimes people just disappeared. Still, he'd promised Martha he'd look into it. The search began at dawn. A handful of townsfolk joined Grady, their boots crunching on the frost-covered ground as they combed the forest near the mine. The trees were dense here, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out much of the weak winter sun. The air was unnaturally still, the only sound the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. It didn't take long to find Tom's truck. It was parked haphazardly at the edge of a dirt road, the driver's door slightly ajar. The keys were still in the ignition, and Tom's thermos of coffee sat on the passenger seat, half full and cold. His boots were neatly placed beside the truck, as if he'd stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. "This don't make no sense," Grady muttered, scratching his head. "Why would he leave his boots?" The group fanned out, calling Tom's name, their voices swallowed by the vastness of the forest. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip below the peaks, casting long shadows across the ground. Just as they were about to call off the search for the day, one of the men let out a sharp whistle. "Over here," he shouted. Grady hurried over, his breath visible in the cold air. The man was standing near a cluster of trees, his flashlight trained on something on the ground. It was a patch of disturbed earth, the leaves and twigs pushed aside as if someone had been dragged through them. Grady knelt down, his gloved hand brushing over the marks. They led deeper into the forest, toward the mine. "You think he went that way?" the man asked, his voice uneasy. Grady didn't answer. He was staring at the ground, his brow furrowed. There, barely visible in the fading light, was a faint, glowing smear. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a thin, iridescent streak that seemed to pulse faintly, like the afterimage of a spark. "What the hell is that?" the man whispered. Grady shook his head. "I don't know, but we're not going any further tonight. It's getting dark, and I don't like the feel of this." As they turned to leave, a low hum filled the air, so faint that at first Grady thought it was his imagination. But the others heard it too, their heads snapping around as they tried to pinpoint its source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in their chests and making the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. "Let's go," Grady said, his voice tight. "Now." They hurried back to the trucks, the hum fading as they put distance between themselves and the forest. But it lingered in their minds, a sound that didn't belong in the natural world. Back in town, the news of Tom's disappearance spread quickly. The townsfolk gathered at the Rusty Spoon, their faces grim. Martha sat in a corner, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The diner was unusually quiet, the usual chatter replaced by uneasy silence. "It's the mine," someone muttered. "Ever since they started digging, things haven't been right." Others nodded in agreement, their eyes darting toward the window, where the silhouette of the mine was just visible against the darkening sky. Stories began to circulate, whispers of strange lights in the forest, of shadows that moved on their own, of a feeling of being watched. No one said it out loud, but the word curse hung heavy in the air. Grady sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. He didn't believe in curses, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The glowing smear, the hum, the way Tom's boots had been left behind it, all added up to something he couldn't explain. As the night deepened, the townsfolk began to drift home, their footsteps echoing on the wooden sidewalks. Grady stayed behind, staring at the map of Black Ridge that hung on the diner's wall. His eyes kept drifting to the mine, marked by a small black dot. He didn't know what was out there, but he knew one thing for certain. Tom Hargrove wasn't the first to disappear, and he wouldn't be the last. The morning sun cast a pale, watery light over Black Ridge, doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the town. The streets were quiet, the usual bustle muted by the weight of Tom Hargrove's disappearance. At the Rusty Spoon, the town's lone diner, the air was thick with the smell of coffee and the low murmur of uneasy conversation. Detective Eleanor Ellie Grayson sat in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She was an outsider here, and it showed in the way the townsfolk glanced at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Ellie was used to it. She'd been an outsider most of her life. She was in her late 30s, with sharp features and dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail. Her eyes, a piercing gray, missed nothing. She'd come to Black Ridge 6 months ago, seeking solitude after a case in the city had gone horribly wrong. The details still haunted her missing child, a trail gone cold, a failure that had cost a life. She'd left the force soon after, her badge tucked away in a drawer, and retreated to this forgotten corner of the world. But solitude was hard to come by in a town as small as Black Ridge. The locals were wary of her, their curiosity tempered by a deep-seated distrust of outsiders. Ellie didn't mind. She kept to herself, spending her days hiking the trails and her nights reading by the light of a single lamp in her rented cabin. She told herself she was content, but the truth was, she missed the work, the chase, the puzzle. And now, it seemed, the puzzle had come to her. Ellie had heard about Tom's disappearance the day before, from the waitress at the diner. The woman had been tight-lipped, her eyes darting toward the window, as if expecting something to appear. But Ellie had caught the undercurrent of fear in her voice, the way her hands trembled slightly as she refilled Ellie's coffee. This morning, Ellie had come to the diner early, hoping to overhear more. She didn't have to wait long. The door creaked open, and Martha Hargrove stepped inside. She looked exhausted, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on Ellie. "You're the detective, aren't you?" Martha asked, her voice trembling. Ellie nodded. "I used to be." Martha hesitated, then slid into the booth across from Ellie. "I need your help. The sheriff, he's a good man, but he doesn't know what to do. No one does. Please, you have to find Tom." Ellie studied Martha's face, seeing the desperation in her eyes. She wanted to say no, to tell Martha that she was retired, that she wasn't that person anymore. But the words stuck in her throat. She couldn't ignore the plea in Martha's voice, the raw fear that mirrored her own memory. "Tell me everything," Ellie said finally. Martha's story was brief but chilling. Tom had gone out to check on a logging site near the mine and never returned. His truck had been found abandoned, his boots left behind. The search party had turned up nothing but a strange, glowing smear on the ground and an eerie hum that had sent them running back to town. "They say it's the mine," Martha whispered, her hands clutching her coffee mug. "Ever since they started digging, things haven't been right. People hear things, see things, and now Tom's gone." Ellie's mind raced. She didn't believe in curses or ghost stories, but she couldn't ignore the facts. Something had happened to Tom, and it was connected to the mine. She needed to see the scene for herself. After Martha left, Ellie lingered in the diner, her eyes scanning the room. The townsfolk were avoiding her gaze, their conversations hushed. She noticed a map on the wall, yellowed with age, and walked over to examine it. It showed the town and the surrounding forest, with the Black Ridge mine marked near the edge. But what caught her eye were the faint lines crisscrossing the mountain tunnels, perhaps, or something else. "That map's older than dirt," a voice said behind her. Ellie turned to see the waitress. A woman in her 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor, and a name tag that read Dottie. "Those lines," Ellie said, pointing to the map. "Are they tunnels?" Dottie hesitated, then nodded. "Old mining tunnels. They've been sealed off for decades. No one goes down there anymore." "Why not?" Dottie's eyes darted toward the window. "Bad things happened in those tunnels. Men went in and never came out. They say the mountain's cursed." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Do you believe that?" Dottie shrugged. "I don't know what to believe. But I know this: ever since Erebus Industries started digging again, things have been off. People hear things at night, see things in the woods, and now Tom's gone." Ellie's gaze returned to the map. The tunnels were a lead, something concrete to follow. But she needed more information. "Do you know where I can find records of the old mines?" she asked. Dottie nodded toward the back of the diner. "There's a storage room back there. Used to be the town library before it moved. Might be some old records in there." Ellie thanked her and made her way to the storage room. It was dimly lit, filled with boxes and dusty shelves. She began to search, her fingers brushing over old ledgers and yellowed newspapers. Finally, she found what she was looking for: a stack of maps and documents related to the original Black Ridge mine. As she spread the maps out on a table, her heart quickened. The tunnels were extensive, far more than she'd expected. And there, in the corner of one map, was a symbol she didn't recognize: a circle, with a series of intricate lines radiating outward. Beneath it was a single word: Erebus. Ellie's mind raced. The symbol matched the one she'd seen on the map in the diner. What did it mean? And why was it connected to the mine? She folded the maps and tucked them into her bag. She needed to see the mine for herself. But first, she needed to talk to someone who knew more about Erebus Industries. As she left the diner, the sun was high in the sky, but the town still felt shrouded in shadow. The mine loomed in the distance, its presence a dark stain on the horizon. Ellie felt a familiar thrill, the kind she hadn't felt in months, the kind that came with the start of a new case. But as she walked toward her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the street was empty. The only sound was the faint hum of the wind, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something metallic. Ellie shook off the feeling and climbed into her car. She had work to do, but as she drove toward the mine, the hum grew louder, vibrating in her chest like a warning. The forest surrounding Black Ridge was a living, breathing entity. Towering pines stretched toward the sky, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that filtered the sunlight into a dim, greenish glow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine resin, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. It was a place of quiet beauty, but today it felt different. Oppressive, watchful. Ellie Grayson stood at the edge of the woods, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a flashlight in her hand. She had spent the morning preparing for this, studying the old maps, gathering supplies, and steeling herself for what she might find. The mine was her ultimate destination, but first, she needed to retrace Tom Hargrove's last steps. The forest was the key. She took a deep breath and stepped into the trees. The change was immediate. The sunlight faded, replaced by a cool, shadowy gloom. The air felt heavier, as if the forest itself was resisting her presence. Ellie moved carefully, her boots crunching on the thick layer of pine needles that carpeted the ground. She followed the path Tom had taken, according to Martha logging trail that wound its way toward the mine. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to close in around her. The trees grew denser, their gnarled roots twisting like serpents across the ground. The air grew colder, and the silence became unnerving. Even the birds had fallen quiet. Ellie paused, her flashlight beam sweeping the area. She was looking for anything out of the ordinary, a clue, a sign, anything that might explain what had happened to Tom. So far, there was nothing. Just the endless trees and the oppressive silence. And then she heard it, a whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there, a soft, sibilant sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Ellie froze, her heart pounding. She turned slowly, her flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The forest was empty. "Hello?" she called, her voice echoing unnaturally. There was no response, just the whisper, growing louder. It wasn't a word, not exact, more like a sound, a hiss that seemed to coil around her, slithering into her ears and settling in her mind. It made her skin crawl. Ellie shook her head, trying to dispel the sound. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself. "It's just the wind." But it didn't feel like the wind. It felt alive. She pressed on, forcing herself to focus. The trail was becoming harder to follow, the undergrowth thicker. She consulted the map, her fingers tracing the lines that marked the old tunnels. According to the map, there should be an entrance nearby, a hidden passage that led deep into the mountain. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. Ellie's breath came faster, her pulse racing. She told herself it was just her imagination, but the sound was impossible to ignore. It was as if the forest itself was trying to speak to her, to warn her. And then she saw it. A patch of disturbed earth, just like the one the search party had found. The leaves and twigs were pushed aside, as if something or someone had been dragged through them. Ellie knelt down, her flashlight beam illuminating the ground. There, barely visible, was a faint, glowing smear. It was the same iridescent substance she'd heard about, pulsing faintly in the dim light. She reached out, her gloved fingers brushing the smear. It was cold, colder than it should have been, and it seemed to cling to her glove like a living thing. She jerked her hand back, her heart pounding. The whisper grew louder, more urgent. Ellie stood, her flashlight beam sweeping the area. The trees seemed to press in around her, their branches twisting like claws. The air was thick with the metallic scent she'd noticed earlier, stronger now, almost overpowering. And then she saw the tunnel. It was partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. Its entrance, a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain. The air around it seemed to shimmer, as if distorted by heat. The whisper was coming from inside, a low, insistent hiss that seemed to beckon her forward. Ellie hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to get as far away from this place as possible. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when she was so close. She took a step forward, then another. The tunnel entrance loomed before her, its darkness absolute. She shone her flashlight inside, but the beam seemed to dissolve into the shadows, swallowed by the void. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, filling her mind until it was all she could hear. And then, just as she was about to step inside, something moved. It was quick, a flicker of shadow at the edge of her vision. Ellie spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was nothing there. Just the trees, their branches swaying gently in a breeze she couldn't feel. But the whisper had stopped. The silence was deafening. Ellie stood frozen, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. And then, from deep within the tunnel, came a sound, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in her chest and made her teeth ache. It was the same sound the search party had described, the same sound that had sent them running back to town. Ellie's instincts screamed at her to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to know what was down there. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the flashlight, and stepped into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed her whole. The tunnel was a gaping maw of darkness, its walls rough-hewn and damp with moisture that glistened in the beam of Ellie's flashlight. The air was thick and cold, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang she had noticed earlier. The hum was louder now, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls around her. It pulsed in her chest, making her heart race and her breath come in shallow gasps. Ellie moved cautiously, her boots crunching on loose gravel and debris. The tunnel sloped downward, the floor uneven and slick with water that had seeped through the rock. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing jagged walls and the occasional rusted piece of mining equipment, a pickaxe here, a broken cart there. It was as if the tunnel had been abandoned in a hurry, the tools of the trade left behind like relics of a forgotten time. The deeper she went, the more the tunnel seemed to change. The walls grew smoother, the rough stone giving way to something that looked almost manufactured. Ellie paused, running her gloved hand along the wall. It was cold and metallic, unlike the natural rock she had seen at the entrance. She shone her flashlight closer, revealing faint etchings in the surface's symbols, similar to the one she had seen on the old map. A circle with intricate lines radiating outward. Erebus. The hum grew louder, more insistent. Ellie pressed on, her unease growing with every step. The tunnel began to widen, opening into a larger chamber. Her flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the darkness, but she could make out the outlines of machinery, massive, hulking shapes that loomed in the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of oil and something else, something sharp and acrid that made her eyes water. And then she saw it. A laboratory. It was tucked into a corner of the chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with strange equipment, glass jars containing glowing liquids, machines with dials and gauges that made no sense, and stacks of papers covered in dense, handwritten notes. In the center of the room was a large table, its surface cluttered with more equipment and what looked like chunks of the glowing mineral she had seen in the forest. Ellie stepped inside, her flashlight beam sweeping the room. The hum was deafening here, vibrating in her bones and making her teeth ache. She moved to the table, her eyes scanning the notes. The handwriting was cramped and difficult to read, but she could make out phrases like energy source and dimensional gateway. One page was covered in equations and diagrams, with the word Erebus circled repeatedly in red ink. Her heart pounded as she realized what she was looking at. This wasn't just a mine, it was a research facility. And whatever they were researching, it was far beyond anything she had ever encountered. A sound behind her made her freeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a soft, shuffling noise, like footsteps. Ellie turned slowly, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The chamber was empty, but the sound came again, closer this time. "Hello?" she called, her voice echoing unnaturally. There was no response, just the hum, growing louder, more intense. Ellie's grip tightened on the flashlight as she moved toward the sound. Her beam caught something on the ground, a footprint, fresh and muddy, leading deeper into the chamber. She followed it, her pulse racing. The footprint led to another tunnel, this one narrower and darker than the first. The hum was almost unbearable here, vibrating in her chest and making her head spin. She pressed on, her flashlight beam revealing more symbols etched into the walls. They seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. And then she saw the door. It was massive, made of the same cold metallic material as the walls. Symbols covered its surface, glowing faintly in the darkness. In the center was a control panel, its surface covered in buttons and dials. A slot in the center of the panel matched the shape of the glowing mineral. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the source of the hum, the heart of the mystery. She stepped closer, her flashlight beam illuminating the door. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe as if alive. The hum grew louder, more intense, until it was all she could hear. And then, from behind her, came a voice. "You shouldn't be here." Ellie spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A man stood there, his face shadowed by the hood of a jacket. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his posture tense and wary. "Who are you?" Ellie demanded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The man stepped closer, his face coming into the light. He was in his 40s, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. His expression was grim, his jaw set in a hard line. "Name's Jack," he said. "I work for Erebus Industries, and you're in way over your head." Ellie's mind raced. She didn't lower the flashlight, keeping it trained on him. "What is this place? What are you doing down here?" Jack hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the door. "You don't want to know. Trust me." "I think I do," Ellie shot back. "People are disappearing. Tom Hargrove is missing. What's going on?" Jack's expression darkened. "Tom's gone, just like the others. And if you don't leave now, you'll end up the same way." Ellie took a step forward, her voice firm. "I'm not leaving until I get answers. What's behind that door?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "Nothing good. They thought they could control it, but they were wrong. It's awake now, and it's hungry." Before Ellie could respond, the hum grew deafening, the vibrations so intense that she stumbled, dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the ground, its beam flickering. Jack grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "We need to go. Now." Ellie pulled free, her eyes blazing, not without answers. Jack's expression was desperate. "You don't understand. That door, it's a gateway to something we were never meant to find. And if it opened..." His words were cut off by a sudden, ear-splitting screech. The door began to glow, the symbols pulsing with a blinding light. The hum became a roar, shaking the ground and making the air crackle with energy. Jack grabbed Ellie's arm again, dragging her toward the tunnel. "Run!" Ellie didn't argue. She grabbed the flashlight and followed him, her heart pounding as the chamber behind them erupted in light and sound. The hum was deafening, the vibration so intense that she could barely keep her footing. They sprinted through the tunnels, the walls around them pulsing with light. And then, just as they reached the entrance, the hum stopped. The silence was deafening. Ellie collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Jack stood beside her, his face pale and drawn. "What the hell was that?" Ellie demanded. Jack didn't answer. He just stared back into the tunnel, his expression haunted. "You need to leave this town," he said finally. "Forget what you saw. Forget everything. Or you'll end up like Tom." Before Ellie could respond, he turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving her alone in the cold, silent darkness. The library in Black Ridge was a relic of a bygone era. Its wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across rows of shelves filled with yellowed books and crumbling documents. Ellie Grayson sat at a heavy oak table, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers, ledgers, and maps. Her fingers traced the brittle pages, her eyes scanning the faded ink for any clue that might explain the horrors she had witnessed in the mine. She had spent the morning gathering every piece of information she could find about Black Ridge's history. The town's past was a patchwork of half-remembered stories and whispered legends, but one thread ran through it all: the mine. It had always been a source of both prosperity and fear, a place where fortunes were made and lives were lost. Ellie's mind kept returning to the door in the tunnel, the symbols pulsing with light, the hum that had shaken her to her core. Jack's warning echoed in her ears. It's awake now, and it's hungry. She needed to understand what it was, and why the mine seemed to be at the center of everything. She picked up an old newspaper, its headline screaming in bold black letters: "Mine collapse claims 12 lives." The date was 1893. The article described a catastrophic accident in the original Black Ridge mine, with survivors reporting strange phenomena in the days leading up to the collapse: lights in the tunnels, unexplained sounds, and a feeling of being watched. One miner had written in his journal, "The mountain is alive. It speaks to us in the dark." Ellie's breath quickened as she flipped through more newspapers. The disappearances weren't new. They had happened before, in cycles that seemed to coincide with the mine's activity. In 1927, a group of miners vanished without a trace. In 1954, a geologist working for a mining company went missing, leaving behind a notebook filled with frantic scribbles about a light that calls from below. And in 1982, the mine had been sealed after a series of unexplained incidents, including the disappearance of 3 workers. The pattern was clear. Every time the mine was opened, people vanished. And now, with Erebus Industries digging again, the cycle had repeated. Ellie leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The mine wasn't just a source of minerals. It was a gateway to what? She didn't know. But the symbols, the hum, the glowing mineral, it all pointed to something far beyond her understanding. She reached for a leather-bound journal she had found, tucked away in a box of old records. The cover was worn, the pages brittle with age. It belonged to a miner named Samuel Hargrove, Tom's great-grandfather. The entries were written in a shaky hand, the ink faded but still legible. The 12th of October, 1893. The light came again last night. It calls to us, soft and sweet, like a siren's song. Some of the men say it's the mountain spirit, angry at us for digging too deep. Others say it's something else, something older. I don't know what to believe, but I fear we've awakened something that should have stayed buried. Ellie's hands trembled as she turned the page. The 15th of October, 1893. The hum grows louder every day. It's in our heads now, a constant presence that won't let us rest. 2 more men vanished last night. We found their tools, but no sign of them. The others are talking of leaving, but the foreman says we must stay. The company needs the ore. I fear we are all doomed. The final entry was dated the 18th of October, 1893, the day of the collapse. The door is open. I saw it last night, deep in the tunnels. It glows with a light that hurts to look at, and the hum, it's unbearable. I tried to warn the others, but they wouldn't listen. They say I'm mad. Maybe I am. But I know this much, the mountain is not what it seems. There is something beneath it, something ancient and hungry. And now, it's free. Ellie closed the journal, her heart pounding. The parallels were impossible to ignore. The hum, the light, the disappearances, they had all happened before. And now, history was repeating itself. She needed to talk to someone who knew more about the town's past, someone who might have answers. Her thoughts turned to Dottie, the waitress at the Rusty Spoon. She had lived in Black Ridge her whole life. If anyone knew the town's secrets, it was her. Ellie gathered the documents and hurried out of the library. The sun was high in the sky, but the town felt shrouded in shadow. The mine loomed in the distance, its presence a dark stain on the horizon. As she walked toward the diner, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The hum was faint now, but it was there, a constant presence in the back of her mind. Dottie was behind the counter when Ellie walked in, wiping down the surface with a rag. She looked up, her expression wary. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked. Ellie slid into a seat at the counter, setting the journal and maps down in front of her. "Some of it, but I need your help. You've lived here your whole life, right?" Dottie nodded slowly. "Born and raised." "Then, you know about the disappearances, the ones that happened before." Dottie's face darkened. She set the rag down and leaned on the counter. "I do. And I know what you're thinking, but some things are better left buried." "People are disappearing again, Dottie," Ellie said, her voice low and urgent. "Tom Hargrove is gone, and I think it's connected to the mine, to something that's been here for a long time." Dottie hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the window. "You're talking about the light? The hum?" Ellie's breath caught. "You've heard it?" Dottie nodded. "Everyone in this town has at one time or another, but we don't talk about it. Not out loud." "Why not?" Dottie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because it listens." Ellie felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Dottie glanced around the diner, as if making sure no one was listening. "The mountain? It's alive. Not in the way you're thinking. It's something else, something old. And it doesn't like being disturbed." Ellie leaned closer. "What is it?" Dottie shook her head. "I don't know. No one does. But every time the mine opens, it wakes up. And people disappear. It's been that way for as long as anyone can remember." Ellie's mind raced. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than she had imagined. The mine wasn't just a source of minerals. It was a prisoner, a gateway. And whatever was on the other side was waking up. "Dottie," Ellie said, her voice urgent, "I need to know everything. Every story, every legend. Anything that might help me stop this." Dottie hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but you're not going to like what you hear." The forest was alive with whispers. Ellie Grayson stood at the edge of the woods, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a flashlight in her hand. The sun had set, casting the trees in long, jagged shadows. The hum was louder now, a constant presence in the back of her mind, vibrating in her chest and making her teeth ache. She had spent the day piecing together the town's history, but the answer she sought lay deeper beneath the mountain, in the tunnels where the light and the hum originated. She wasn't alone this time. A small group of townsfolk had agreed to join her, their faces grim but determined. There was Carl, a burly mechanic with a no-nonsense attitude; Sarah, a schoolteacher with a sharp mind and a steady hand; and Ben, a young man who'd grown up hearing the stories of the mine and was desperate to prove they weren't just legends. They stood behind her now, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "You sure about this?" Carl asked, his voice low. Ellie nodded. We don't have a choice. If we don't find out what's down there, more people will disappear. Sarah adjusted the straps of her backpack. And if we don't come back? Ellie met her gaze. Then at least we tried. The group fell silent as they entered the forest. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches twisting like claws. The hum grew louder with every step, vibrating in their chests and making the air feel heavy. Ellie led the way, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The path was familiar now, but the forest felt different, alive, watchful. They reached the hidden tunnel entrance without incident, the overgrown vegetation parting to reveal the dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if distorted by heat. The hum was deafening here, a low, resonant roar that made the ground tremble. Ellie turned to the group. "Stay close, and if anything happens, run." They nodded, their faces pale but determined. Ellie took a deep breath and stepped into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed them whole. The tunnel was just as she remembered, cold, damp, and lined with the same metallic walls, etched with glowing symbols. The hum was louder here, vibrating in their bones and making it hard to think. Ellie moved cautiously, her flashlight beam sweeping the walls. The symbols seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. "What the hell is this place?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Ellie said, "but we're about to find out." They pressed on, the tunnel sloping downward. The air grew colder, the metallic tang stronger. The hum became a roar, shaking the ground and making the walls vibrate. Ellie's heart pounded as they reached the chamber she had discovered earlier, the laboratory, with its strange equipment and glowing mineral. But something was different. The door, the massive metallic door with its glowing symbols, was no longer closed. It stood slightly ajar, a faint, pulsating light spilling through the crack. The hum was deafening, the vibrations so intense that Ellie had to steady herself against the wall. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. Ellie didn't answer. She moved toward the door, her flashlight beam illuminating the symbols. They pulsed with a blinding light, the hum growing louder with every step. She reached out, her gloved hand brushing the surface. It was cold, colder than it should have been, and it seemed to vibrate beneath her touch. "Ellie, don't," Carl started, but it was too late. The door swung open. The light was blinding, a searing, otherworldly glow that made Ellie shield her eyes. The hum became a roar, shaking the ground and making the air crackle with energy. She stumbled back, her heart pounding as the light spilled into the chamber, illuminating the walls and casting long, jagged shadows. And then she saw it. Beyond the door was a massive cavern, its walls lined with the same glowing mineral she had seen in the forest. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and something else, something sharp and acrid, that made her eyes water. In the center of the cavern was a structure, a massive metallic archway that pulsed with light. The symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly, the same symbols she had seen on the door and the walls. But it wasn't the archway that made her blood run cold. It was the figures. They were humanoid, but not human. Their bodies were twisted and elongated, their skin pale and translucent, like the surface of a deep-sea creature. Their eyes glowed with the same light as the mineral, and their movements were jerky, unnatural. They moved around the archway, their hands brushing the symbols as if in some kind of ritual. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She had seen enough horror movies to know what this was, a gateway. And whatever was on the other side, it wasn't from this world. "We need to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. But it was too late. One of the figures turned, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. It let out a sound, a low, guttural growl that made the air vibrate. The others turned as well, their movements unnaturally fast. Ellie's heart pounded as they began to move toward the door, their eyes fixed on her. "Run!" she shouted, turning and sprinting back down the tunnel. The group didn't need to be told twice. They ran, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they stumbled over loose rocks and debris. The hum was deafening, the vibration so intense that Ellie could barely keep her footing. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart leaping into her throat as she saw the figures emerging from the door, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were fast, too fast. Ellie pushed herself harder, her lungs burning as she sprinted through the tunnel. The entrance was just ahead, the faint light of the moon visible through the trees. She burst into the open air, the others close behind her. They didn't stop running until they were deep in the forest, the hum fading into the distance. Ellie collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. The others did the same, their faces pale and drawn. "What the hell were those things?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. Ellie shook her head. "I don't know, but we need to warn the town. Whatever's down there, it's waking up." The forest was silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of Ellie and her companions as they crouched in the shadows, their flashlights off to avoid drawing attention. The figures from the cavern had not followed them into the woods, but the hum still lingered, a faint vibration in the air that made Ellie's skin crawl. She could feel it in her bones, a constant reminder of what they had seen. "We need to get back to town," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to warn everyone." Ellie nodded, her mind racing. The gateway, the figures, the humid, was all connected. But how? And more importantly, how could they stop it? "We can't just leave," Ben said, his voice low but urgent. "Those things, they're still down there. What if they come out?" Ellie's jaw tightened. Ben was right. They couldn't just walk away, but they also couldn't face whatever was in that cavern alone. They needed help and they needed answers. "We'll go back to town," Ellie said finally. "But we're not done. Not yet." The group moved quickly through the forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of pine needles. The hum grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the mine, but it didn't disappear entirely. It was still there, a constant presence in the back of Ellie's mind, like a whisper she couldn't quite hear. When they reached the edge of town, Ellie turned to the others. "Keep this quiet for now. We don't want to cause a panic, but be ready. If anything happens, if you see or hear anything strange, call me immediately." They nodded, their faces pale but determined. Ellie watched as they disappeared into the night, then turned and headed for her cabin. She needed to think, to piece together everything she had learned. But as she stepped inside, she realized she wasn't alone. Jack was sitting at her kitchen table, his face shadowed by the dim light of a single lamp. He looked up as she entered, his expression grim. "You went back," he said, his voice low. Ellie froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife she kept in her boot. "How did you get in here?" Jack ignored the question. "You shouldn't have gone back. You don't understand what you're dealing with." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "Then explain it to me." Jack hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the window. "It's not just a mine, it's a prison, and you've just woken up the prisoner." Ellie's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" Jack leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "The mountain, it's not just rock, it's a barrier, a seal. And the mine, it's the key." Ellie's mind raced. The gateway, the symbols, what are they? Jack's expression darkened. "They're a warning, a lock, and you've just unlocked it." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "What's on the other side?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metallic object. It was a piece of the glowing mineral, its surface pulsing faintly in the dim light. "This is what they're after," he said, his voice low. "The mineral, it's not just a source of energy, it's a bridge between our world and theirs." Ellie's mind reeled. "The figures, the ones in the cavern, what are they?" Jack's expression was haunted. "They're the guards, the keepers, and now that the door is open, they'll come through, all of them." Ellie's heart pounded. "How do we stop it?" Jack shook his head. "We can't. Not without closing the door. And to do that, we need the key." "The key?" Jack held up the piece of mineral. "This, but it's not enough. We need the original key, the one they used to seal it the first time." Ellie's mind raced. "Where is it?" Jack hesitated, then nodded toward the window. "In the town. Hidden. But it's not going to be easy to find. And even if we do, closing the door won't be enough. We'll need to destroy it. Permanently." Ellie's jaw tightened. "Then we better get started." The town of Black Ridge was eerily quiet, the streets empty and the windows dark. The hum had grown louder, a constant, oppressive presence that seemed to seep into every corner of the town. Ellie and Jack moved quickly through the shadows, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of pine needles that carpeted the ground. The piece of glowing mineral in Jack's hand pulsed faintly, casting an otherworldly light on their path. "Where are we going?" Ellie whispered, her breath visible in the cold night air. "The church," Jack replied, his voice low. "The key's hidden there. Or at least, that's what the old records say." Ellie's mind raced. The church was one of the oldest buildings in Black Ridge, its steeple a familiar silhouette against the night sky. But she had never thought of it as anything more than a place of worship. Now, it seemed, it held the key to stopping the nightmare that was unfolding. They reached the church quickly, its wooden doors creaking as Jack pushed them open. The interior was dark, the air thick with the scent of old wood and incense. Jack led the way down the aisle, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The pews were empty, the altar silent and still. "Where is it?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the back of the church, where a small door led to the basement. He opened it carefully, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. "Down here," he said, his voice grim. Ellie followed him down the stairs, her heart pounding. The basement was cold and damp, the walls lined with shelves filled with old books and relics. Jack moved to the far wall, where a large, ornate cross hung. He reached behind it, his fingers brushing against something hidden in the wall. There was a soft click, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a box, its surface covered in the same symbols Ellie had seen in the mine. Jack lifted it carefully, his hands trembling slightly. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "The key." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "What do we do with it?" Jack set the box on a nearby table and opened it. Inside was a piece of the glowing mineral, larger and more intricate than the one he had shown her earlier. It pulsed faintly, the light casting strange shadows on the walls. "We need to take it back to the mine," Jack said. "To the door. It's the only way to close it." Ellie's mind raced. "And then what?" Jack's expression was grim. "Then we destroy it. Permanently." Ellie nodded, her jaw tightening. "Let's go." They moved quickly, leaving the church and heading back toward the forest. The hum was louder now, a constant, oppressive presence that seemed to vibrate in their chests. The mine loomed in the distance, its silhouette dark against the night sky. As they reached the edge of the forest, Ellie felt a sudden, sharp pain in her head. She stumbled, clutching her temples as the hum grew deafening. The world seemed to tilt, the trees and shadows twisting and shifting around her. "Ellie?" Jack's voice was distant, muffled by the roar in her ears. She forced herself to focus, to push through the pain. The hum was unbearable, the vibration so intense that she could barely think. But she couldn't stop, not now. They reached the hidden tunnel entrance, the overgrown vegetation parting to reveal the dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if distorted by heat. The hum was deafening here, a low, resonant roar that made the ground tremble. Ellie took a deep breath and stepped into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed them whole. The tunnel was just as she remembered, cold, damp, and lined with the same metallic walls etched with glowing symbols. The hum was louder here, vibrating in their bones and making it hard to think. Ellie moved cautiously, her flashlight beam sweeping the walls. The symbols seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. They reached the chamber quickly, the massive metallic door standing slightly ajar. The light spilling through the crack was blinding, a searing, otherworldly glow that made Ellie shield her eyes. The hum was deafening, the vibration so intense that she had to steady herself against the wall. Jack moved to the door, his hands trembling as he held the key. The symbols on the door pulsed faintly, the light growing brighter as he approached. He placed the key in the slot, the symbols shifting and writhing as if alive. There was a loud, resonant click, and the door began to close. But it was too late. The figures emerged from the light, their twisted, elongated bodies moving with unnatural speed, their glowing eyes locked onto Ellie and Jack, their movements jerky and unnatural. The hum grew louder, the vibration so intense that Ellie could barely keep her footing. "Run!" Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. They turned and sprinted back down the tunnel, the figures close behind them. The hum was deafening, the vibration so intense that Ellie could barely think. She pushed herself harder, her lungs burning as she ran. The entrance was just ahead, the faint light of the moon visible through the trees. They burst into the open air, the figures close behind them. Ellie didn't stop running until they were deep in the forest, the hum fading into the distance. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Jack did the same, his face pale and drawn. "We did it," he said, his voice trembling. The doors closed. Ellie nodded, her heart pounding. But as she looked back toward the mine, she couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was far from over. The forest was alive with tension, the hum a constant oppressive presence that seemed to vibrate in the very air. Ellie and Jack crouched in the shadows, their breaths visible in the cold night air. The figures from the cavern had not followed them into the woods, but the hum still lingered, a faint vibration that made Ellie's skin crawl. She could feel it in her bones, a constant reminder of what they had seen. "We need to destroy the key," Jack said, his voice low and urgent. "If we don't, they'll just open the door again." Ellie nodded, her mind racing. The key piece of glowing mineral was their only hope of stopping the nightmare that was unfolding. But destroying it wouldn't be easy. It was tied to the gateway, to the figures, to the hum. It was a bridge between worlds, and breaking it would have consequences. "How do we do it?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated, his expression grim. "We need to take it back to the mine, to the source. But it's not going to be easy. The figures, they'll be waiting for us." Ellie's jaw tightened. "We don't have a choice." They moved quickly through the forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of pine needles. The hum grew louder as they approached the mine, a constant, oppressive presence that seemed to vibrate in their chests. The mine loomed in the distance, its silhouette dark against the night sky. As they reached the hidden tunnel entrance, Ellie felt a sudden, sharp pain in her head. She stumbled, clutching her temples as the hum grew deafening. The world seemed to tilt, the trees and shadows twisting and shifting around her. "Ellie!" Jack's voice was distant, muffled by the roar in her ears. She forced herself to focus, to push through the pain. The hum was unbearable, the vibration so intense that she could barely think. But she couldn't stop. Not now. They stepped into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing them whole. The tunnel was just as she remembered, cold, damp, and lined with the same metallic walls etched with glowing symbols. The hum was louder here, vibrating in their bones and making it hard to think. Ellie moved cautiously, her flashlight beam sweeping the walls. The symbols seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. They reached the chamber quickly, the massive metallic door standing slightly ajar. The light spilling through the crack was blinding, a searing, otherworldly glow that made Ellie shield her eyes. The hum was deafening, the vibration so intense that she had to steady herself against the wall. Jack moved to the door, his hands trembling as he held the key. The symbols on the door pulsed faintly, the light growing brighter as he approached. He placed the key in the slot, the symbols shifting and writhing as if alive. There was a loud, resonant click, and the door began to close. But it was too late. The figures emerged from the light, their twisted, elongated bodies moving with unnatural speed, their glowing eyes locked onto Ellie and Jack, their movements jerky and unnatural. The hum grew louder, the vibration so intense that Ellie could barely keep her footing. "Run!" Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. They turned and sprinted back down the tunnel, the figures close behind them. The hum was deafening, the vibration so intense that Ellie could barely think. She pushed herself harder, her lungs burning as she ran. The entrance was just ahead, the faint light of the moon visible through the trees. They burst into the open air, the figures close behind them. Ellie didn't stop running until they were deep in the forest, the hum fading into the distance. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Jack did the same, his face pale and drawn. "We did it," he said, his voice trembling. The doors closed. Ellie nodded, her heart pounding. But as she looked back toward the mine, she couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was far from over. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains, casting a pale golden glow across the town of Black Ridge. The hum had finally faded, leaving behind an eerie silence that felt almost unnatural. Ellie Grayson stood at the edge of the forest, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she stared at the mine in the distance. The massive structure loomed like a scar on the landscape, its dark silhouette a reminder of the horrors they had faced. The door was closed, the key was destroyed, but the cost had been high. Jack was gone. Ellie's chest tightened as she thought of him. He had stayed behind in the cavern, buying her time to escape with the key. She had heard the explosion as she ran, a deafening roar that shook the ground and sent a plume of smoke and dust billowing into the sky. When she had returned, the cavern had been sealed. The tunnel collapsed. There was no sign of Jack or the figures. The town was quiet, the streets empty. The townsfolk had gathered in the church, their faces pale and drawn as they listened to Ellie's account of what had happened. She had told them everything: the gateway, the figures, the hum. They had listened in silence, their eyes wide with fear. "Is it over?" Martha Hargrove had asked, her voice trembling. Ellie had hesitated, then nodded. For now. But she wasn't sure. The mine was sealed, the key destroyed, but the mountain still loomed over the town, its presence a constant reminder of what lay beneath. The hum was gone, but the memory of it lingered, a faint vibration in the back of her mind. Ellie turned away from the mine and walked back into town. The streets were quiet, the windows dark. The townsfolk had retreated to their homes, seeking solace in the familiar. But Ellie knew that nothing would ever be the same. She reached her cabin and stepped inside, the door creaking softly as it closed behind her. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. She moved to the table and sat down, her eyes falling on the piece of glowing mineral she had kept. It was small, no larger than a pebble, but it pulsed faintly, casting an otherworldly light on the table. Ellie stared at it, her mind racing. The key was destroyed, but the mineral still held power. It was a bridge between worlds, a remnant of the gateway. And as long as it existed, the danger remained. She reached out and picked it up, the cold surface sending a shiver down her spine. The hum was faint, but it was there, a constant presence in the back of her mind. She knew what she had to do. Ellie stood and moved to the fireplace, the mineral clutched tightly in her hand. She knelt down and placed it in the hearth, then reached for the matches. Her hands trembled as she struck one, the flame flickering in the dim light. She hesitated, her mind racing. Destroying the mineral would sever the last connection to the gateway, but it would also erase any chance of understanding what had happened. It was a risk, but it was one she had to take. Ellie took a deep breath and dropped the match into the hearth. The mineral flared brightly, the light searing her eyes. The hum grew louder, a deafening roar that shook the walls and made the air crackle with energy. Ellie stumbled back, shielding her eyes as the light grew brighter, more intense. And then, with a final resonant pulse, it was gone. The room was silent, the air still. Ellie lowered her hand, her heart pounding. The mineral was gone, reduced to ash. The hum was gone, the vibration in her chest fading into nothingness. It was over. Ellie sank to the floor, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The weight of everything she had been through pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. But she had done it. She had closed the door, destroyed the key, and severed the connection to the other side. But as she sat there, staring at the ashes in the hearth, she couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was far from over. The mountain still loomed over the town, its presence a constant reminder of what lay beneath. The hum was gone, but the memory of it lingered, a faint vibration in the back of her mind. Ellie knew that she couldn't stay in Black Ridge. The town was a shadow of what it had once been, its spirit broken by the horrors they had faced. She needed to leave, to find a place where she could start over. But as she packed her bags and prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The hum was gone, but the memory of it lingered, a faint vibration in the back of her mind. And as she drove away from Black Ridge, the town fading in her rearview mirror, she noticed a faint glow in the distance. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a faint, pulsating light that seemed to follow her. The hum began again, faint but unmistakable.